Manjaro Linux began its journey in July of 2011, born from a straightforward idea: what if the power of Arch Linux could be made accessible to everyone? Not just the technically inclined. Arch had built a reputation for being fast, flexible, and cutting edge, but it also demanded patience, skill, and a willingness to read documentation. Manjaro set out to change that equation. The project started as a community effort developed primarily in Austria, and it quickly found its audience. The goal was simple but ambitious: take everything that made Arch great and wrap it in a more approachable package. Users would get the same rolling release model, meaning their systems would continuously receive updates rather than waiting for major version upgrades. They would also use the same package manager Pacman, which handles software installation with efficiency and speed. What really set Manjaro apart was its focus on the out-of-the-box experience. Rather than presenting users with a blank slate, Manjaro offered ready-to-use installations with popular desktop environments like GNOME, KDE Plasma, and XFCE. Users could download an ISO run through a graphical installer and have a fully functional system within minutes. No manual partitioning guides, no command line configurations, just a working desktop ready for daily use. Over the years, Manjaro grew into one of the more popular Linux distributions available. It carved out a reputation as the gateway to Arch, the distribution that let everyday users experience the benefits of Arch-based computing without the steep learning curve. For many people, Manjaro was their first introduction to the world of rolling releases and bleeding-edge software. It filled an important niche in the Linux ecosystem, proving that power and accessibility were not mutually exclusive concepts. The tension at the heart of Manjaro did not appear overnight. It was built into the structure from the moment a business entity was layered on top of what had always been a community effort. Manjaro GmbH and Company KG. The official business name came later. The community was there first. They built the distribution, nurtured it, and turned it into something people actually wanted to use. But when the company was formed, something telling happened. All the valuable assets ended up in corporate hands. The trademarks, the branding, the legal identity of Manjaro itself. These were not held collectively by the volunteers who had done the work. They were owned by a business entity that had not created any of it. This is a pattern we see repeated across the open source world, and it rarely ends well. A community pours their time and passion into building something. Then a company steps in, incorporates, and suddenly they hold all the cards. The community that gave birth to the project finds itself in a fundamentally weak position. They can contribute, they can volunteer, they can evangelize. But when decisions matter, when direction is being set, the people who own the assets have the final say. It does not matter that the community predates the company. It does not matter that the community created the value in the first place. Legal ownership trumps historical contribution. Every time, this structural imbalance creates a persistent undercurrent of resentment. Contributors begin to question who they are really working for. The lines between community service and corporate enrichment blur. And when trust erodes in an open source project, the consequences are serious. Contributors can leave, they can fork the project, they can take their expertise elsewhere. The company might own the name, but they do not own the knowledge, the relationships, or the goodwill that make a project thrive. The problems at Manjaro did not explode onto the scene overnight. They seeped in slowly like water through cracks in a foundation. Year after year, contributors drifted away. Some left quietly, simply stopping their work and moving on to other projects. Others left loudly, posting frustrated farewells that documented exactly why they were walking away. The common thread in their departures was a growing sense that the business side of Manjaro simply was not up to the task of stewardship. Community members began using pointed language to describe what they were seeing. The word incompetence appeared repeatedly in forum discussions and blog posts. Contributors questioned whether the people holding the reins actually understood what they were managing. Technical decisions that should have been straightforward became mired in bureaucracy, or were simply ignored by leadership. Meanwhile, the word control also kept coming up. Developers felt micromanaged by people who had not earned their positions through technical merit. Decisions seemed to flow from the top down, with little room for the kind of collaborative problem solving that open source projects typically thrive on. What made this especially painful was the contrast with Manjaro's early years. The project had once attracted talented people who believed in its mission. But as the gap between the community's investment and the business's competence widened, that belief eroded. Contributors who had once spent their evenings testing packages or writing documentation found better uses for their time. Each departure made the project a little weaker, a little less capable of catching mistakes before they reached users. By the time the calls for a fork finally emerged, they were not the product of a single incident or a sudden disagreement. They were the logical conclusion of years of accumulated frustration, broken promises, and lost potential. The crisis had been building for a long time. The breaking point arrived in the form of a forum post. A Manjaro team member using the handle Aragorn published what they called the Manjaro 2.0 manifesto right on the official project forums. This was not a private letter sent to leadership or a closed-door discussion. It was a public document out in the open for the entire community to read and judge. What gave this manifesto its weight was the names attached to it. 19 team members signed on. These were not casual users or outside critics. The signatories included developers who built the distribution, community managers who handled user relations, forum moderators who kept discussions running, and even the company's own technical lead. When someone that embedded in the organization puts their name on a public call for restructuring, it signals that patience has truly run out. The manifesto itself was comprehensive. It laid out a detailed restructuring plan for how the project should operate. The signatories called for genuine transparency in decision-making processes. They wanted community contributors to have a real voice in the direction of the distribution, not just an advisory role that leadership could ignore. The document demanded structural changes to how power was distributed between the business entity and the people doing the actual work. This was not a request for minor adjustments. It was a proposal to rebuild the governance foundation entirely. The underlying message was unmistakable. Either leadership agrees to these changes, or the community would have to consider walking away and starting fresh with a fork. The manifesto made one thing crystal clear. This was not simply a list of grievances or a hopeful wish list. It was an ultimatum. The 19 signatories were drawing a line in the sand. Either the current leadership agrees to meaningful restructuring, or the community will take the nuclear option and fork the project entirely. A fork sounds dramatic, because it is in practical terms it means creating an entirely new distribution that shares the same codebase but operates under different governance. Users would face a choice: stay with the original Manjaro under its current corporate structure, or migrate to the new community-driven alternative for developers. The stakes are even higher. They would need to decide where to invest their limited time and energy. Do they stick with the established brand, name, and existing infrastructure, or do they start over with nothing but their principles and the code itself. The Linux world has seen this play out before, when OpenOffice was controlled by Oracle. The community forked it into LibreOffice. That project now thrives, while OpenOffice has essentially stagnated when concerns arose about Canonical's direction with Ubuntu Linux. Mint rose to prominence by offering a different philosophy. These precedents offer both hope and caution. A successful fork can outpace its parent, but it requires massive community coordination and sustained momentum. The trademark question looms over everything. Manjaro GmbH Co. KG owns the name, the logos, and the official domains. A forked project would need an entirely new identity from day one. The infrastructure presence. Another hurdle: the build, servers, the repositories. The download mirrors the forum itself, all controlled by the corporate entity. Starting fresh means rebuilding all of that from scratch, while convincing users to make the switch. Here's something strange: while the community burned with conflict, and developers threaten to walk away, the releases kept coming. Manjaro 25.0 Zetar arrived in October 2025. Then, Manjaro 26.0 code, named Anlin, followed in February 2026. Stable updates continued rolling out, week after week, addressing kernel's desktop environments and security patches like nothing was wrong. This creates a bizarre picture for anyone watching from the outside. The project appeared to be functioning. Normally, users downloading these releases would have no idea that 19 team members had just signed a document threatening to fork the entire project. The download pages looked professional, the release announcements carried the same tone. They always had. Everything seemed fine. But this normalcy was misleading. The technical side of Manjaro had developed a kind of momentum that existed independently of the organizational chaos. Developers who had spent years building this distribution knew their work. They could push updates, test packages, and cut releases almost on autopilot. The machinery kept running because the people operating it were good at their jobs even when they were deeply unhappy with management. New initiatives even emerged during this period. Manjaro Immutable entered community testing, representing a significant technical shift toward immutable system design. Manjaro Summit. A new project reached public alpha status. These were not the actions of a dying project, they were the actions of skilled people continuing to do what they had always done. The disconnect is striking. On one level, you had active development, new features, and regular releases. On another level, you had a governance structure that had driven away contributors and created an ultimatum. The technical work had become almost completely disconnected from the organizational health of the project, and that separation could not last forever.